The black sedan cut through the rain-soaked streets of Chicago like a shadow slicing through the night. Streetlights flickered against the wet pavement, casting broken reflections that shattered beneath the tires. The city was asleep, but the darkness was wide awake. Behind the wheel sat Alexander Moretti, a man whose name alone could empty a room in seconds. At 36, his dark hair had begun to streak with gray at the temples, a silent testament to the weight he carried. His steel-blue eyes held no warmth, only the cold calculation of a predator who had long ago forgotten what mercy felt like. They called him the Ghost of Chicago, not because he was hard to find, but because those who crossed him had a habit of disappearing without a trace. His empire stretched across the city like a spider's web, touching everything from the glittering high-rises downtown to the forgotten warehouses by the river. Politicians whispered his name in fear. Rivals spoke it only in prayers. But tonight, those cold eyes betrayed something else, something buried deep beneath layers of violence and control. 5 years ago, he had been a different man. 5 years ago, he had held his daughter Isabella in his arms, watched her blow out 4 candles on a birthday cake, heard her call him Daddy, with a voice like sunshine breaking through clouds. 5 years ago, a fire had taken everything from him. The flames had consumed his home, his wife, and his little girl while he stood helpless outside, watching his world turn to ash. Since that night, Alexander Moretti had become something less than human. He had buried his heart in the same grave as his daughter and filled the empty space with ice and iron. The sedan pulled into an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Rain hammered against the metal roof like 1,000 angry fists. Daniel, his most trusted lieutenant, was already waiting beside a black SUV, his face tight with tension. Tonight's delivery was supposed to be routine, a message from a rival who had made the fatal mistake of encroaching on Moretti territory. Nothing more than a reminder of who ruled these streets. Alexander stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles. He didn't bother with an umbrella. The rain meant nothing to a man who had already drowned in grief. Daniel handed him the keys without a word. His eyes said everything his lips couldn't. Something was wrong. Alexander moved to the trunk. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed through the empty warehouse like a gunshot. What he saw inside made his heart stop. A man's body lay crumpled in the trunk, throat slit, eyes frozen in permanent terror. Blood had pooled beneath him, dark and congealing. But it wasn't the corpse that stole the breath from Alexander's lungs. It was the small figure curled beside it. A little girl, no more than 6 years old. Her brown curls were matted with blood that wasn't her own. Her tiny dress, once white with pink flowers, was now stained crimson. She was trembling, her eyes squeezed shut, her small hands covering her ears as if trying to block out a nightmare that had already happened. Alexander stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't part of the message. This wasn't supposed to happen. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened back to steel. He turned to Daniel, his voice flat and deadly as a blade. "Get rid of her. She's seen too much." Daniel's hand hesitated at his side. In 15 years of serving Alexander Moretti, he had never questioned an order. He had buried bodies, silenced witnesses, and done things that would haunt a lesser man's nightmares. But this was different. This was a child. "Boss," Daniel said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's just a kid. Maybe we should. I gave you an order." Alexander's words cut through the air like shards of ice. "Do I need to repeat myself?" Daniel swallowed hard. His fingers moved toward the gun holstered beneath his jacket. The rain continued to pound against the warehouse roof, drowning out the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. He took a step toward the trunk, and then the girl moved, her small body uncurled slowly, like a flower trying to bloom in a storm. Her trembling hands fell away from her ears. Her eyes, which had been squeezed shut against the horror surrounding her, finally opened. She looked up. Alexander felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Those eyes, steel blue, exactly like the ones that stared back at him every morning in the mirror, exactly like the ones that had closed forever 5 years ago in a burning house. Isabella's eyes. No, that was impossible. Isabella was dead. He had identified what remained of her body. He had buried her in a white casket too small for any parent to bear. But those eyes. God, those eyes. The little girl's lips parted. Her voice came out broken, barely a whisper, fragile as glass about to shatter. "Daddy?" The word hit Alexander like a bullet to the chest. His entire body went rigid. The cold mask he had worn for 5 years cracked, revealing something raw and bleeding underneath. Daniel froze mid-step, his hand falling away from his weapon. He stared at his boss, watching the most dangerous man in Chicago unravel before his eyes. "Boss?" Daniel's voice seemed to come from miles away. "Boss, are you okay?" Alexander didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed around a grief he thought he had buried long ago. He moved without thinking, his body operating on instinct while his mind remained trapped in the past. He reached into the trunk, his hands shaking in a way they hadn't shaken since the night of the fire. That's when he saw it. A small locket hung around the girl's neck, glinting in the dim warehouse light. It was silver, shaped like a heart, old-fashioned in a way that seemed out of place against her blood-stained dress. Alexander's fingers closed around it. He pressed the tiny clasp. The locket opened. Inside was a photograph. A woman's face smiled back at him, frozen in time. Dark hair, green eyes, a smile that had once made him believe he could be something other than a monster. Victoria Sanders. The woman who had disappeared from his life 7 years ago without a word, without a trace, without an explanation. Alexander's blood turned to ice. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the girl. He looked at those steel blue eyes that mirrored his own. 7 years since Victoria vanished. 6 years old. The math was simple. The truth was devastating. Victoria hadn't just disappeared. She had taken a secret with her. The memories crashed over Alexander like waves breaking against a crumbling shore. 7 years ago, Victoria Sanders had walked into his life like a summer storm. She was a waitress at a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, a place Alexander frequented not for the food but for the privacy it offered. She had no idea who he was, no idea about the blood on his hands or the empire built on bones. To her, he was just Alex, a businessman with sad eyes and a reluctant smile. Their affair had been brief but intense. 3 months of stolen moments, secret rendezvous, and whispered promises that both of them knew he couldn't keep. She was light in a world of darkness, and he had been selfish enough to want her anyway. Then one morning, she was gone. No note, no phone call, no explanation. Her apartment emptied overnight, her phone disconnected, her existence erased as if she had never been real. Alexander had searched for her, quietly at first, then desperately. He had used every resource at his disposal, called in every favor, threatened every contact who might know where she had vanished. Nothing. Victoria Sanders had become a ghost. He had told himself she was afraid, that she had discovered what he truly was and fled before his world could swallow her whole. He had told himself it was better this way, that she was safer far away from him. But now, staring at the child trembling in the trunk of a dead man's car, Alexander realized the truth. Victoria hadn't run from him. She had run to protect someone from him. Daniel. His voice came out hoarse, scraped raw by emotions he had spent years trying to kill. "Get a DNA test. Tonight. I need to know if this girl is mine." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes moving between his boss and the child. "And what do we do with her in the meantime?" Alexander looked at the girl. Emma. The name was sewn into the collar of her dress, a mother's precaution for a child too young to remember her own address. Emma stared back at him with those haunting blue eyes, her small body still shaking, her lips pressed together as if she was afraid to make a sound. "Take her to the safe house on Maple Street," Alexander said. "Full security. No one in or out without my permission." "Boss." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If she's really yours, if the enemies find out you have a weakness, I know." Alexander cut him off. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. A daughter meant leverage. A daughter meant vulnerability. In his world, love was just another word for liability. "We need to handle this carefully," Daniel continued. "If Petrov or any of the other families discover I said I know," Alexander's voice hardened. "For now, we tell no one. She's a witness, nothing more. Understood?" Daniel nodded, but his eyes betrayed his doubt. Alexander turned back to the trunk, to the corpse lying cold and forgotten. He reached into the dead man's jacket, searching for identification, for some clue about who had sent this twisted message. His fingers found a folded piece of paper tucked into the breast pocket. He pulled it out, unfolding it beneath the flickering warehouse light. 5 words, written in red ink, that looked too much like blood. "This is just the beginning, Moretti." The safe house on Maple Street had seen many things over the years. Wounded soldiers of Alexander's empire recovering from bullet wounds, witnesses waiting to testify before they disappeared into new lives, enemies spending their final hours before meeting fates better left unspoken. But it had never sheltered a child. Emma sat in the corner of the bedroom, her knees pulled tight against her chest, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her broken pieces together. She hadn't moved in 3 hours. hadn't eaten the food placed before her, hadn't touched the glass of water sweating on the nightstand. She simply stared at nothing, her blue eyes empty, her small body frozen in a silence more disturbing than any scream. Dr. Morrison closed his medical bag with a soft click. He was an older man, gray-haired and gentle, the only physician Alexander trusted with the secrets that lived and died within his organization. He had patched up gunshot wounds at midnight, declared times of death without asking questions, and prescribed medications that would never appear on any official record. But tonight, his weathered face carried something Alexander had never seen before: helplessness. "Physically, she's unharmed," Dr. Morrison said quietly, stepping away from the bed where Emma remained curled in her corner. "No injuries, no signs of assault." But mentally, he shook his head. This child has witnessed something no 6-year-old should ever see. The trauma is severe. She may not speak for days, weeks, even. Alexander stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching from a distance he couldn't seem to close. Every instinct told him to remain detached. She was a liability, a complication, a problem to be solved and filed away. But those eyes. Every time he looked at her, he saw Isabella. He saw birthday candles and bedtime stories. He saw small fingers wrapped around his thumb and a voice calling him daddy like it was the most natural word in the world. "What does she need?" Alexander's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Time," Dr. Morrison replied. "Patience. Someone to make her feel safe again." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "She needs a parent, Mr. Moretti. Not a guardian, not a protector, a parent." The word landed like a knife between Alexander's ribs. Dr. Morrison left without another word, leaving Alexander alone with the broken child and the ghosts of his past. Night fell over the safe house. Alexander sat in a chair outside Emma's room, unable to leave, unable to enter. The door remained cracked open, a sliver of light cutting through the darkness. Then the screaming began. Emma's voice tore through the silence like a wounded animal, high and desperate and absolutely terrified. She thrashed in the bed, tangled in sheets that had become her prison, crying out for the one person who could never answer. "Mommy, Mommy, please, Mommy." Alexander was on his feet before he realized he had moved. He stood in the doorway, frozen, watching the child fight demons he couldn't see. What was he supposed to do? How did he comfort a nightmare when he had spent his entire life becoming one? His hands clenched at his sides, useless, powerless, the most dangerous man in Chicago, brought to his knees by a 6-year-old's tears. The screaming faded into sobs. The sobs softened into whimpers. And then, finally, silence returned. Alexander stepped closer, his footsteps barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. Emma's eyes were open now, staring at the ceiling, tears still wet on her cheeks. Her lips moved. "Bad men," she whispered, her voice cracked and small. "Bad men. Hurt Mommy." 3 days passed, and Emma remained trapped in her silent world. She ate only when the hunger became unbearable, small bites that she chewed mechanically without tasting. She slept in restless fits, waking every few hours with tears streaming down her face and her mother's name dying on her lips. She flinched at every sound, every shadow, every footstep that came too close. Alexander watched it all from a distance, powerless in a way he had never experienced before. He could command armies, he could topple empires, he could make grown men weep with a single glance, but he could not reach a 6-year-old girl drowning in grief. On the 4th morning, he summoned Daniel to his office. "I need someone," Alexander said, staring out the rain-streaked window. "Someone who knows how to handle children, someone who can help her." Daniel nodded slowly. "I may know someone. A woman named Rachel. She used to work as a pediatric nurse at Children's Memorial before she left to care for her mother. Good background. Clean record. No connections to any of the families. Bring her to me." By that afternoon, Rachel stood in the safe house living room, her calm brown eyes taking in the armed guards, the security cameras, and the man whose reputation preceded him like a death sentence. She was 32, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and a face that carried warmth like others carried weapons. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that suggested she was trying to impress anyone. She simply stood there, steady and unafraid, waiting for Alexander to speak. "You understand the situation?" he asked. "A traumatized child who needs care," Rachel replied. "That's all I need to understand." Alexander studied her for a long moment. Most people crumbled under his gaze, their confidence melting like snow in sunlight. Rachel simply met his eyes and waited. "She doesn't speak," he said finally. "She barely eats. She has nightmares every night. Then she needs patience." Rachel's voice carried no judgment, no fear, Not pressure, not expectations. Just someone willing to sit with her in the dark until she's ready to find the light. Something in her words struck a chord deep within Alexander's chest. He nodded once. Daniel will show you to her room. Rachel entered the bedroom quietly, her movements slow and deliberate. Emma was in her usual corner, knees drawn up, eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the walls. The little girl tensed immediately at the new presence. Rachel didn't approach. Instead, she lowered herself to the floor near the door, leaving a vast ocean of space between them. She settled against the wall, crossing her legs comfortably, as if she had all the time in the world. "You know," Rachel said softly, her voice like a gentle stream, "when I was little, I had a cat named Whiskers. She was the grumpiest cat you ever saw, hated everyone, scratched anyone who came too close." Emma didn't move, but her eyes flickered toward Rachel for just a fraction of a second. "It took me 3 whole months before Whiskers let me pet her," Rachel continued, a small smile playing on her lips. 3 months of sitting near her, talking to her, letting her know I wasn't going anywhere. And one day, she just walked over and put her paw on my hand. Silence filled the room. Rachel didn't push. She simply sat there, breathing quietly, her presence a steady anchor in Emma's storm. Minutes passed, then an hour, and then, so slowly that Rachel almost missed it, Emma's small hand slid across the floor. Her tiny fingers, still trembling, reached out and touched Rachel's palm. The envelope arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Daniel stood in the doorway of Alexander's study, his face carved from stone, his eyes betraying nothing, but his hands told a different story. They gripped the white envelope with a tension that spoke of secrets too heavy to carry. "The results," Daniel said simply. Alexander sat behind his mahogany desk, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him. He had spent the past 5 days waiting for this moment, yet now that it had arrived, he found himself unable to move. The envelope crossed the desk. It landed before him like a verdict waiting to be read. Daniel retreated to the corner of the room, silent as a shadow. Alexander stared at the envelope for a long moment. His name was typed across the front in cold, clinical letters. Inside those folded pages lay a truth that would either confirm his suspicions or shatter them completely. His fingers, steady enough to pull a trigger without hesitation, trembled as they broke the seal. The paper unfolded with a soft whisper. His eyes scanned the medical jargon, the charts, the percentages. Numbers and terminology blurred together until 3 figures burned themselves into his vision. 99.97% probability of paternity. The words swam before his eyes. He read them again, and one more time, as if repetition might somehow change their meaning. Emma was his daughter, his blood, his flesh, his child. The glass of whiskey shattered against the far wall before Alexander even realized he had thrown it. Amber liquid dripped down the wallpaper like tears. Boss Daniel stepped forward. "Leave me." Alexander's voice cracked on the command. Daniel hesitated for only a heartbeat before retreating through the door, closing it softly behind him. Alone, Alexander collapsed back into his chair. The paper crumpled in his fist as memories surged forward, drowning him in a past he had tried so hard to forget. The last night with Victoria. Her apartment filled with candles because the power had gone out, her laughter echoing off the walls as they shared cheap wine and cheaper pizza. The way she had looked at him, her green eyes holding something he couldn't name. And then, her voice, hesitant and small. "Alex, there's something I need to tell you. Something important. I've been trying to find the right time, but..." His phone had rung. Business. Always business. He had kissed her forehead, promised to return within the hour, and walked out the door. He never saw her again. Now, sitting in the wreckage of his certainties, Alexander understood what she had been trying to say. The words she never got to speak, the secret she had carried alone into exile. She had been pregnant, and she had run, not from him, but from everything he represented, from the violence, from the danger, from a world where a child would never be safe. Victoria had sacrificed everything to protect their daughter from him. The realization cut deeper than any blade. Alexander rose from his desk and walked to Emma's room. Through the cracked door, he could see her sleeping, her small form curled beneath the blankets, Rachel dozing in a chair nearby. In sleep, Emma's face was peaceful, innocent, untouched by the horrors that stalked her waking hours. His daughter. "My daughter," Alexander whispered, the words foreign on his tongue. "For 6 years, you existed somewhere in this world, and I never knew. I never searched. I never found you." His forehead pressed against the doorframe. "I'm so sorry." Alexander Moretti had conquered empires. He had brought powerful men to their knees. He had stared death in the face and never blinked. But standing in a toy store on Michigan Avenue, surrounded by pink princesses and stuffed animals, he felt utterly lost. He bought everything. Dolls with golden hair and glittering dresses, a dollhouse that cost more than most cars, stuffed bears as tall as Emma herself, art supplies in every color imaginable, books with shining covers, and magical stories. Daniel watched the shopping spree with barely concealed bewilderment. In 15 years, he had never seen his boss spend money on anything that couldn't be weaponized. The presents arrived at the safe house in a parade of shopping bags. Alexander had them arranged carefully in Emma's room, a kingdom of toys fit for a princess. Emma glanced at them once, then returned her gaze to the window. She didn't touch a single one. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching his grand gesture crumble into meaninglessness. The dollhouse gathered dust. The stuffed bears sat untouched in their perfect rows. The art supplies remained sealed in their packaging. He had failed. Again. Rachel found him in the hallway an hour later, his shoulders slumped against the wall, his eyes carrying a defeat she had never expected to see in a man like him. She didn't even look at them, Alexander said quietly. I thought if I gave her enough, if I showed her that I could provide Mr. Moretti. Rachel's voice was gentle but firm. Emma doesn't need things. She's surrounded by things. Her mother gave her love with nothing but words and time. Alexander looked up, his steel blue eyes searching her face. She needs presence, Rachel continued. Not presents. She needs someone to sit with her, to be patient, to show her that they're not going anywhere, no matter how long it takes. The words echoed Dr. Morrison's advice from days ago, advice Alexander had heard but failed to understand. I don't know how, he admitted, the confession costing him more than he could measure. I've forgotten how to be anything other than what I am. Rachel smiled softly. Then learn. Start small. Read her a story. Just sit beside her. Let her see that you're trying. That evening, Alexander entered Emma's room with a single book tucked under his arm. It was a children's story about a lost rabbit finding its way home. Simple, gentle, nothing like the man holding it. Emma was in her usual spot by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Alexander sat down, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to seem distant. He opened the book and began to read. His voice felt strange, forming the childish words. Awkward, unpracticed. He stumbled over sentences that should have been simple, his tongue unaccustomed to stories that didn't end in blood. But he kept reading. Emma didn't move closer. She didn't acknowledge him at all. Yet somewhere in the middle of chapter 2, Alexander noticed something. Her eyes had shifted. She was no longer staring out the window. She was looking at him. He finished the chapter, closed the book, and sat in silence. The distance between them remained, but it felt smaller somehow, less insurmountable. Then Emma spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, fragile as morning frost. Are you my real daddy? Alexander had answered Emma's question with the only truth he knew. Yes, sweetheart, I'm your real daddy. She hadn't responded, hadn't smiled or cried or reached for him. She had simply nodded once, as if confirming something she had long suspected, and returned her gaze to the window. But she hadn't pulled away, and for now, that was enough. The next morning, everything changed. Daniel burst into Alexander's study without knocking, his face pale beneath its usual composure. In his hand, he clutched a manila folder, thick with photographs and documents. We found him, Daniel said, the man behind the delivery, behind Victoria, behind all of it. Alexander took the folder. His jaw tightened as he spread the contents across his desk. Photographs of a man with a shaved head and cold, calculating eyes, surveillance images of fortified compounds, financial records tracing money through shell companies across 3 continents. Nikolai Petrov. The name ignited a fury that Alexander had kept buried for 2 years. Petrov was the head of the Russian syndicate that had tried to establish trafficking routes through Chicago. Alexander had shut them down ruthlessly, dismantling their operations piece by piece, burning their warehouses, eliminating their soldiers. He had thought Petrov defeated, scattered, finished. He had been wrong. Victoria, Alexander said, his voice barely controlled. What happened to her? Daniel hesitated. That hesitation told Alexander everything he needed to know, but he forced himself to listen anyway. Petrov's men found her 2 months ago in Seattle, Daniel said quietly. She had been hiding for years, moving every 6 months, using different names. But somehow, they tracked her down. The photographs confirmed the horror. Victoria's apartment, ransacked and bloodstained, evidence of a struggle, Signs of violence too brutal to describe. She held out for 2 weeks, Daniel continued. They wanted information about you, your operations, your weaknesses. She didn't give them anything. Alexander's hands trembled as they gripped the edge of his desk. 2 weeks, he repeated. She suffered for 2 weeks. Daniel nodded grimly. When they realized she wouldn't break, Petrov killed her himself. Then he took Emma. He knew the girl would lead him to you. A message wrapped in innocence. The dead man in the trunk had been one of Petrov's couriers, a disposable pawn sent to deliver a package that would devastate Alexander far more than any bomb or bullet. Emma witnessed it, Alexander said slowly, the realization dawning like poison spreading through his veins. She saw them kill her mother. Most likely. Petrov wanted her traumatized, wanted you to see what he had done to your family. Alexander closed his eyes. The image of Emma's empty stare suddenly made terrible sense. The nightmares, the silence, the way she flinched at every shadow. She had watched her mother die. His phone buzzed on the desk. An unknown number. A video message. Alexander pressed play. Nikolai Petrov's face filled the screen, his thin lips curled into a serpent's smile. Behind him, flames danced in an oil drum, casting hellish shadows across his scarred features. "Moretti," Petrov said, his accent thick and mocking. "Did you enjoy my gift? The little girl has her mother's eyes. Don't you think? Such a pity Victoria couldn't be more cooperative." He leaned closer to the camera. "The child was just the beginning. I will take everything from you. Your empire, your soldiers, your precious daughter. Everything you love will burn, just as you burned what was mine." The video ended with 6 words that echoed through Alexander's skull like a death sentence. "I am coming for you, Moretti." War was coming. Alexander could feel it in his bones, taste it in the air like smoke before a wildfire. But wars required planning, patience, time, and in the quiet hours between strategy sessions and intelligence reports, something unexpected began to bloom. It started with breakfast. Rachel had been called away for a family emergency, leaving Alexander alone with Emma for the first time. He stood in the kitchen of the safe house, staring at the stove like it was an enemy he didn't know how to defeat. "Your mommy ever make you pancakes?" he asked, attempting casual conversation while fumbling with a mixing bowl. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her small feet dangling above the floor. She nodded once, barely perceptible. "Right." Alexander cracked an egg. Shell fragments tumbled into the batter. "Can't be that hard." 20 minutes later, the kitchen looked like a flour bomb had detonated. Batter dripped from the ceiling. The first 3 pancakes had been cremated beyond recognition. Smoke curled from a pan that Alexander was fairly certain he had ruined permanently. He stood amid the chaos, a spatula in one hand, his designer shirt covered in white powder, his face streaked with something that might have been egg yolk. And then he heard it. A sound so small, so unexpected, that he almost missed it entirely. Emma was laughing. It wasn't much, just a soft giggle, barely louder than a breath, but it transformed her entire face, chasing away the shadows that had lived there since that terrible night in the warehouse. Alexander stared at her, frozen. Something cracked open in his chest, something he had thought died in a fire 5 years ago. "You think this is funny?" he asked, unable to stop the smile tugging at his own lips. Emma covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes bright with the first spark of joy he had seen in them. "You look silly," she whispered. "I look like a professional chef," Alexander replied with mock dignity. Emma giggled again, and the sound-healed wounds he hadn't known were still bleeding. They ate burnt pancakes together that morning. They were terrible, crispy on the outside, raw in the middle, utterly inedible by any reasonable standard. Alexander had never tasted anything so perfect. As days passed, Emma began to share pieces of her past. Small fragments offered hesitantly, like precious gifts she wasn't sure he deserved. She told him about the apartment in Seattle, about her mother's garden on the fire escape, about bedtime stories and silly songs and Sunday morning cartoons. "Mommy had a picture," Emma said one afternoon, tracing patterns on the window glass. "A man with dark hair. She looked at it sometimes when she thought I was sleeping." Alexander's throat tightened. "Did she tell you who he was?" Emma shook her head. "She just said he was someone she loved, someone she had to protect me from, but she never said why." Victoria had carried his photograph for 6 years. She had loved him enough to keep his memory, and feared his world enough to hide their daughter from it. The knowledge was a blade that cut both ways. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple, Emma climbed down from the window seat and walked toward Alexander. Her small footsteps were hesitant, uncertain. She stopped beside his chair. And then, slowly, deliberately, she reached out and wrapped her tiny fingers around his hand. "Daddy?" The words still sent tremors through his heart. "Yes, sweetheart?" Emma looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much darkness for someone so young. "I don't want the bad men to take you too." Alexander made a silent promise that night, with Emma's small hand still wrapped around his fingers. The bad men would never touch her again. Within 48 hours, he transformed his world into a fortress. The safe house on Maple Street was abandoned. It had served its purpose, but it was too exposed, too close to the city, too vulnerable to the eyes that Alexander now knew were watching. The new location was a sprawling estate in the suburbs of Lake Forest, hidden behind 12-foot walls and acres of dense woodland. Alexander had purchased it years ago through a maze of shell companies, a contingency plan for a day he had hoped would never come. Now that day had arrived. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter in rotating shifts. Motion sensors lined every approach. Security cameras covered every angle, their feeds monitored around the clock by a team of specialists loyal only to Alexander. The windows were bulletproof. The doors were reinforced steel. A panic room had been installed in the basement, stocked with supplies to last weeks. Daniel coordinated the operation with military precision, transforming the estate into a compound that could withstand a small army. Rachel returned from her family emergency to find herself living in what felt like a prison dressed as a mansion. She said nothing about the guards or the cameras or the weapons that seemed to appear in every room. She simply resumed her place at Emma's side, her calm presence a counterweight to the tension that electrified the air. But Emma noticed everything. She stopped laughing at breakfast. She stopped sharing stories about her mother. She retreated back toward the window seats and corner shadows that had been her refuge in the early days. "Why are there so many guards?" she asked Rachel one afternoon, her voice small and tight. Rachel stroked her hair gently. "They're here to keep us safe, sweetheart." "Safe from the bad men?" Rachel's heart clenched. "Yes, honey, safe from the bad men." Emma pulled her knees to her chest, making herself as small as possible. "The bad men always find us. Mommy tried to hide, but they found us anyway." That evening, Rachel confronted Alexander in his study. "She's terrified," Rachel said, her voice carrying an edge he had never heard before. "All this security, these guards with guns everywhere she looks, it's making things worse. She feels like a prisoner, not a protected child." Alexander stood by the window, watching the guards patrol the grounds below. "Would you prefer I leave her defenseless? Petrov is coming. It's not a question of if, but when. I understand the danger, but there has to be a balance. She's 6 years old. She needs to feel like a child, not a target. She is a target." The words came out harsher than Alexander intended. "Until Petrov is dealt with, she will remain a target. I won't apologize for doing whatever it takes to keep her alive." Rachel fell silent. There was nothing she could say to argue with that truth. 3 days later, Daniel burst into Alexander's study with a tablet in his hands. "We have a problem." The screen showed footage from the estate's perimeter cameras. A small, dark shape hovered above the tree line, its red lights blinking against the gray sky. A drone, surveillance-grade, military spec, equipped with cameras that could capture license plates from 300 feet. Alexander's blood turned to ice. "Track its signal," he ordered. Daniel shook his head grimly. "Already tried. It's bouncing through a dozen proxy servers, but we both know who sent it." Alexander stared at the screen as the drone circled lazily overhead, a mechanical vulture waiting for the right moment to descend. Nikolai had found them. The attack came at 3:47 inches the morning. Alexander was still awake, reviewing security protocols in his study, when the first explosion rocked the estate. The blast tore through the eastern gate, sending a fireball climbing into the night sky and reducing the guard station to rubble. His phone buzzed simultaneously with Daniel's voice, sharp and urgent. "We're under attack. Multiple entry points. At least 30 hostiles." Alexander was already moving. He grabbed the pistol from his desk drawer and sprinted down the hallway toward Emma's room. Gunfire erupted across the grounds. The staccato rhythm of automatic weapons mixed with the deeper boom of shotguns and the crack of sniper rifles. Shouts echoed through the darkness, punctuated by screams that were cut short too suddenly. Alexander burst through Emma's door to find Rachel already there, clutching the terrified girl in her arms. Emma's eyes were wide with a fear he had prayed she would never feel again. Panic room. Now. He grabbed them both, half carrying Emma as they raced through the corridor. Bullets shattered the windows behind them, spraying glass across the hardwood floors. A guard stumbled past, blood streaming from a wound in his shoulder, still firing his weapon at shadows in the garden. The basement stairs seemed endless. Alexander's heart pounded against his ribs as he counted each step, each second, each moment that separated his daughter from safety. The panic room door was 6 inches of solid steel, hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar. Alexander punched in the code with trembling fingers. The lock disengaged with a mechanical hiss. He pushed Rachel and Emma inside. "Stay here. Do not open this door for anyone but me. Anyone." Emma grabbed his sleeve, her small fingers clutching the fabric with desperate strength. "Don't go," she whispered. "Daddy, please don't go." Alexander knelt before her, taking her face in his hands. Outside, the sounds of battle grew closer. Time was running out. "I have to, sweetheart. I have to make sure the bad men can't hurt you." Tears streamed down Emma's cheeks. Her lower lip trembled. But then, something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of the strength that had kept her alive through horrors no child should endure. "I'll be brave, Daddy," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I'll be brave like you." The words nearly broke him. He kissed her forehead, rose to his feet, and sealed the door behind him. The next 2 hours were a blur of violence and chaos. Alexander fought through his own home like a demon unleashed. He moved from room to room, corridor to corridor, eliminating every hostile who dared enter his domain. His guards fell around him, but for every man he lost, he took 3 of Petrov's soldiers. Daniel appeared at his side somewhere in the carnage. Blood splattered across his face, a rifle in his hands. "Eastern wing is clear. They're retreating." By dawn, the battle was over. The estate was a ruin. Bullet holes scarred every wall. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets. Bodies littered the grounds, being collected by Alexander's surviving men. 7 of his guards were dead, 12 more wounded. The attackers had lost 23, but Emma was safe. Rachel was unharmed. The panic room had held. Alexander stood in the wreckage of his study, surveying the damage with eyes that burned from exhaustion and rage. "How did they know?" he asked quietly. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "The rotation schedules, the guard positions. They knew exactly when and where to hit us." Alexander turned to face his lieutenant, his voice cold as winter steel. They knew things only someone inside could have told them. The realization hung between them like poison in the air. "We have a traitor." The hunt for the traitor consumed Alexander like a fever. He trusted no one. Every guard became a suspect. Every whispered conversation seemed sinister. Every shadow held the potential for betrayal. Only Daniel remained above suspicion. 15 years of loyalty, 15 years of blood and secrets shared, had earned him that immunity. Everyone else existed under a cloud of doubt. The investigation was swift and merciless. Financial records were examined. Phone logs were traced. Every man who had known the security protocols was interrogated, their stories cross-referenced and verified. Within 72 hours, Alexander had his answer. Marcus Webb, a guard who had served the Moretti organization for 8 years. A man Alexander had trusted to protect his warehouses, his operations, his very home. A man who had been receiving payments from a Russian shell company for the past 3 months. They brought Marcus to the basement of a warehouse on the south side. The same kind of warehouse where deals were made and enemies disappeared. The kind of place where the walls had absorbed so many screams that they no longer echoed. Alexander entered alone, removing his jacket and rolling up his sleeves with methodical precision. Marcus was bound to a chair, his face already swollen from Daniel's preliminary questioning. He looked up at Alexander with eyes that held no remorse, only defiance. "Petrov offered me more in 1 month than you paid me in a year." Marcus spat. "You think loyalty buys anything in this world? Money buys. Power buys. Loyalty just gets you killed." Alexander said nothing. He simply picked up a pair of pliers from the table nearby. "How much information did you give him?" Marcus laughed, a wet and bitter sound. "Everything. The safe houses, the rotation schedules, the security codes. He knows where you sleep. He knows where the girl sleeps." Something dark and terrible flickered in Alexander's eyes. What happened next lasted 45 minutes. Marcus screamed until his voice gave out. He begged until his words became incoherent sobs. He confessed every detail of his betrayal, every piece of information he had sold, every conversation he had reported back to Petrov's handlers, and when there was nothing left to extract, Alexander ended it with a single bullet. He emerged from the basement, blood on his hands and shirt, his face carved from stone. Daniel waited outside with a towel and a change of clothes. Neither man spoke. There was nothing to say. Alexander returned to the estate as dawn broke over the damaged grounds. He walked through the corridors toward Emma's room, intending to check on her before cleaning himself up. He didn't expect to find her standing in the hallway. Emma had wandered from her room, searching for him after another nightmare. She had heard voices coming from the study where the surveillance feeds played on monitors. She had seen everything: the interrogation, the pliers, the gun, the blood. She had watched her father become the monster that everyone else saw. Alexander froze. Blood still stained his hands. His shirt was splattered with evidence of what he had done. He looked like the very nightmare that haunted Emma's sleep. "Emma," he started. She stumbled backward, her small body colliding with the wall. Her eyes were wide with pure primal terror. "Emma, let me explain." "No." The word tore from her throat like a wounded animal's cry. She scrambled away from him, retreating into the corner where she had hidden during her first days here. Her knees pulled tight against her chest. Her arms wrapped around herself. Her body trembled violently. "You're scary," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're scary, just like the bad men." Alexander stood frozen in the hallway, Emma's words echoing through his skull like a death sentence. "You're scary, just like the bad men." He had been called many things throughout his life: ruthless, dangerous, merciless. He had worn those labels like armor, believing they made him strong. But hearing them from his daughter's lips, seeing the terror in her eyes as she looked at him like he was the monster under her bed, shattered something deep within his chest. He didn't follow her, didn't try to explain. What could he possibly say? Instead, he retreated to his study, closed the door, and stood before the mirror that hung on the wall. The reflection that stared back was a stranger. Blood still flecked his face. His eyes were hollow, haunted. The lines around his mouth had deepened into grooves carved by decades of violence. He looked exactly like what he was: a killer, a monster, a man no different from Nikolai Petrov. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had spent years telling himself that his violence had purpose, that he was protecting his territory, his people, his family, that the blood on his hands was necessary, justified, righteous. But what separated him from Petrov? They both killed. They both tortured. They both destroyed anyone who stood in their way. The only difference was the side of the line they stood on. And now, his own daughter couldn't tell the difference. A knock interrupted his spiral. Rachel entered without waiting for permission. Her face was pale but determined, her eyes carrying a mixture of compassion and concern. "Emma's sleeping," she said quietly. "I gave her something to help. She was hyperventilating." Alexander said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on his own reflection. "She saw, didn't she?" Rachel continued. "Whatever you did to that man, she saw it." "Yes." Rachel moved to stand beside him, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "You live in a world of violence, Mr. Moretti. It's all you've known for so long that you've forgotten any other way exists. I was protecting her. The traitor endangered everyone. I'm not judging your reasons." Rachel's voice remained steady. "I'm telling you what your daughter sees. She sees a man who hurts people. She doesn't understand context or justification. She only understands fear." Alexander's hands clenched at his sides. "What would you have me do? Let Petrov take everything? Let him kill Emma the way he killed Victoria? No. But you can't save her from monsters by becoming one yourself." Rachel paused. "Emma needs a father. Not a weapon, not a shield. A father." The silence stretched between them, heavy with truths Alexander had spent years avoiding. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know how to be anything else." "Then learn." Rachel's voice softened. "You learned for her before. You can do it again." She left him alone with his reflection and his choices. Alexander stood there for a long time. He thought about Isabella, lost to flames. He thought about Victoria, lost to his enemies. He thought about Emma, lost in fear of the man who should protect her. He had built an empire on blood and bones. He had conquered cities and crushed rivals. He had become the most powerful man in Chicago. And he had lost everything that mattered in the process. When he finally moved, his steps carried him to Emma's room. She was curled beneath the blankets, her cheeks still damp with tears, her breathing shallow and uneven even in medicated sleep. Alexander knelt beside her bed. His hand reached out, hesitating just above her hair, afraid to touch, afraid to taint. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice cracking on the words. "I'm so sorry for what you saw, for what I am." He bowed his head. "When this is over, when Petrov is gone, Daddy will leave this life behind. I promise you, Daddy will become someone better, someone you don't have to be afraid of." A tear fell from his eye, landing on the blanket beside her hand. "I'll become the father you deserve." Rebuilding trust was slower than breaking it. Alexander understood that now. Every smile he had earned from Emma, every moment of connection they had built together, had been shattered in a single night of blood and violence. He would have to earn it all back, one piece at a time. He started by changing the small things. No more meetings in the estate. No more guards with visible weapons near Emma's room. No more phone calls about business within her earshot. When he spent time with her, he was simply Alex. Not the boss. Not the monster. Just a father trying to find his way back to his daughter. The first few days were painful. Emma flinched when he entered a room. She avoided his eyes. She answered his questions with single words, her voice barely above a whisper. But Alexander didn't give up. He sat with her during meals, even when she refused to look at him. He read stories outside her door, even when she wouldn't let him in. He left small drawings on her nightstand, stick figures of a daddy and a daughter holding hands. On the 4th day, Emma picked up one of those drawings and didn't throw it away. On the 7th day, she let him sit beside her on the couch. On the 10th day, she asked him to read her a story again. Rachel watched the transformation with quiet wonder. She had seen Alexander Moretti at his worst, had witnessed the darkness that lived inside him, but she had also seen him kneel before a sleeping child and weep. There were 2 men inside him, she realized. The question was which one would survive. The breakthrough came on a quiet afternoon. Alexander had found an old set of watercolors in one of the closets. He brought them to Emma, spreading the paints and brushes across the kitchen table like an offering. "I don't know how to paint," he admitted. "Maybe you could teach me?" Emma studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face for something only she could name. Then she picked up a brush. They painted together for hours. Alexander's attempts were terrible. Clumsy blobs of color that looked nothing like what they were supposed to represent. Emma giggled at his failures, her laughter growing louder and more genuine with each passing hour. When they finished, Emma showed him her masterpiece. 3 figures stood beneath a yellow sun. A tall man with dark hair, a little girl with brown curls, and a woman with auburn hair, standing beside them. "That's you," Emma said, pointing to the tall figure. "That's me, and that's Rachel." Alexander's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. It's our family," Emma said simply. Across the room, Rachel caught Alexander's eye. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. A connection that had been building slowly, quietly, beneath the surface of their shared mission to protect this child. That evening, after Emma fell asleep, Alexander found Rachel on the back porch, watching the stars. "She called us a family," he said. Rachel smiled softly. "She sees what she wants to see, what she needs. And what do you see?" Rachel turned to face him. Their eyes met in the moonlight. For a moment, neither spoke. "I see a man trying to become better than what he was," she said finally. "That's more than most people ever attempt." Alexander reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. The peaceful days that followed felt like stolen time. Emma laughed freely now. She called him Daddy without hesitation. She drew more pictures of their little family, each one featuring the 3 of them together. It couldn't last. Alexander knew that. But he allowed himself to hope anyway, until Daniel's phone call shattered the illusion. "Boss, we have a problem. Our sources inside Petrov's organization just went dark. All of them." At the same time, Alexander's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" Daniel's voice was grim. "It means Petrov is coming. Everything he has. Every soldier, every weapon, every resource. He's planning one final assault. When? Soon. Maybe days. Maybe hours." Alexander ended the call and stared at the stars above. The storm had finally arrived. Alexander spent the next 48 hours preparing for war. He called in every favor owed to him, contacted allies who had stood beside the Moretti family for generations, summoned soldiers who had sworn blood oaths to serve until death. Tony Caruso, who controlled the docks, pledged 50 men. The Benedetti brothers from the south side brought another 30. Smaller crews offered what they could, united by a common enemy who threatened all of their territories. By the time Alexander finished gathering his forces, he commanded an army of nearly 200 soldiers. But none of that mattered if Emma wasn't safe. He arranged for her transport personally, a safe house in Wisconsin, 3 hours from Chicago, owned through so many shell companies that even his closest associates didn't know it existed. The location had never been used, never been mentioned in any communication, never been connected to the Moretti name. It was his final contingency, his last resort. The morning of the departure arrived too quickly. Emma sensed something was wrong. She clung to Alexander's hand as they walked toward the waiting vehicle, her small fingers gripping his with desperate strength. "I don't want to go," she said, her voice trembling. "Why can't I stay with you?" Alexander knelt before her, taking both of her hands in his. Behind them, Rachel waited by the car, her face etched with worry. "Daddy has to take care of something important," Alexander said gently. "Something that will make sure the bad men never bother us again." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But what if you don't come back? Mommy said she would come back too, and she didn't." The words pierced Alexander's heart like a blade. "Emma, look at me." He tilted her chin up, meeting those blue eyes that mirrored his own. "I promise you, I will come back. Daddy has never broken a promise to you, has he?" Emma shook her head slowly. "And I won't start now. When this is over, we're going to leave this place. All three of us. We'll find a house somewhere quiet, with a big yard where you can play. No more guards, no more hiding. Just us. Promise?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "I promise." "On my life." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Her small body shook with sobs. Her fingers clutched his jacket like she was afraid to let go. "I love you, Daddy," Emma whispered into his shoulder. Alexander closed his eyes. Those words, so simple, so pure, filled the hollow spaces in his soul that he thought would remain empty forever. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in this world." He released her reluctantly, helping her into the car beside Rachel. Their eyes met over Emma's head, and Rachel nodded once, a silent promise to protect the child with her life. The car pulled away. Emma's face remained pressed against the window until the vehicle disappeared around the bend. Alexander stood alone in the driveway, watching the dust settle. That night, he sat in his study, surrounded by maps and tactical plans. His soldiers were positioned, his weapons were ready. The assault on Petrov's compound would begin at dawn. On his desk lay Emma's latest drawing, the three figures beneath the yellow sun, their family. Alexander traced the outlines with his finger, memorizing every detail. Tomorrow, he might die, but tonight, he allowed himself to remember what he was fighting for. His phone shattered the silence. Daniel's voice came through, broken and ragged in a way Alexander had never heard before. "Boss, the safe house. Petrov's men. They found it." Alexander's blood turned to ice. Rachel managed to hide, but Emma... Daniel's voice cracked. "They took her. Nikolai has Emma." The safe house had been a fortress. 12 guards. Motion sensors covering every approach. Reinforced doors and bulletproof windows. A location so secret that only 3 people in the world knew it existed. None of it had mattered. Rachel would later describe the attack in fragments, her voice hollow with shock and her body trembling beneath hospital blankets. They came at midnight. No warning, no sound, just shadows pouring through windows that should have been impenetrable. Moving with military precision that spoke of months of planning, the guards fell in seconds. Silenced weapons and surgical strikes eliminated them before they could reach their own guns. The alarm system never triggered. The panic room was breached before Rachel could reach it. She had grabbed Emma from her bed, the child still groggy with sleep, and ran for the back exit. They almost made it. They were 3 steps from the door when the first bullet caught Rachel in the shoulder. She fell, clutching Emma, trying to shield the girl with her own body. Blood soaked through her shirt as she pressed herself over the screaming child. "Run, Emma," Rachel had gasped. "Run and hide." But there was nowhere to hide. The men surrounded them. Black masks, cold eyes. Weapons pointed at Rachel's head. And then he appeared. Nikolai Petrov walked through the carnage like a king surveying his conquered territory. His shaved head gleamed in the moonlight. His thin lips curved into a smile that held no warmth, only triumph. He stood over Rachel, looking down at her with contempt. "The nanny," he said, his accent thick with amusement. "How touching. Throwing yourself in front of bullets for a child that isn't even yours." He kicked her wounded shoulder. Rachel screamed. Emma thrashed in the arms of the soldier holding her, tears streaming down her face. "Leave her alone! Leave her alone!" Nikolai turned to the child. His smile widened. "There she is, little Emma. You have your father's eyes. Did you know that?" He reached out and touched her cheek with one finger. Emma recoiled like she had been burned. "Your mother had the same look," Nikolai continued, "right before the end. That same defiance. That same fear hiding underneath." He gestured to his men. "Bring the girl. Leave the woman. Let her live long enough to deliver a message." Emma's screams echoed through the night as they carried her away. Rachel lay bleeding on the floor, watching helplessly as the child disappeared into the darkness. Alexander arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Rachel was in surgery. The doctors said she would survive, but the bullet had done significant damage. He waited outside her room until she woke. "I'm sorry," Rachel whispered, tears sliding down her pale cheeks. I tried to protect her." "This isn't your fault." Alexander's voice was steady, but his hands shook at his sides. "Tell me everything you remember, every detail," she told him. Every word, every face she could recall, every second of the nightmare that had unfolded. When she finished, Alexander's phone buzzed. A video message from an unknown number. He pressed play. The screen showed a cage, iron bars, rusted and cold, barely large enough for a dog, and inside, curled into a ball with her knees pressed against her chest, was Emma. She looked so small, so fragile. Her eyes were red from crying, her body trembling with terror. Nikolai's face appeared, filling the frame. "Moretti," he said, savoring the name like fine wine. "Your little princess is quite comfortable, as you can see. She's been asking for her daddy. It's rather pathetic, actually." He stepped back, revealing the cage again. Emma looked up at the camera, her lips forming a single word. "Daddy." "Here are my terms," Nikolai continued. "Full surrender. Complete transfer of all territories, all operations, all assets. You will disband your organization and submit yourself to my custody." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You have 24 hours to comply. If you refuse, if you attempt any rescue, if you do anything other than exactly what I have demanded." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes gleaming with malice. "The girl will suffer the same fate as her mother, and I will make sure you receive every moment on video." The screen went black. Alexander stared at the phone in his hand, his entire body vibrating with a rage that transcended anything he had ever felt before. 24 hours. Alexander Moretti had been angry before. He had felt rage when rivals encroached on his territory. He had felt fury when betrayers sold his secrets. He had felt wrath when the fire took Isabella and his wife from him 5 years ago. But this was something different. This was a darkness so complete, so consuming, that it erased everything else inside him. Every thought, every emotion, every instinct narrowed to a single burning point. He would get Emma back, and he would destroy anyone who stood in his way. The hospital room trembled with the force of his departure. Nurses scattered from his path. Security guards looked away, unwilling to meet the eyes of a man who radiated death like heat from a furnace. Daniel waited by the car, already on the phone coordinating their response. "Where is he?" Alexander's voice was barely human. "Compound outside Rockford. Old meatpacking plant he converted into a fortress. We're still gathering intel on defenses, but I don't care about defenses." Alexander slammed the car door behind him. "Call everyone, every soldier, every ally, every man who has ever owed us a debt. I want them all. Tonight." Daniel hesitated. "Boss, we need time to plan. Petrov's compound is heavily fortified. If we rush in without Alexander grabbed Daniel by the collar, pulling him close. His eyes were wild, feral, stripped of everything civilized. "My daughter is in a cage. Every second I waste is a second she spends terrified and alone. I am not waiting for a plan. I am not waiting for anything." He released Daniel, smoothing his own jacket with hands that shook with barely contained violence. "Call them. Now." The calls went out within the hour. Tony Caruso answered immediately. "Whatever you need, Alex." Petrov crossed a line that nobody comes back from. The Benedetti brothers pledged their full forces without hesitation. "Children are sacred, even in our world. We ride with you." Smaller crews fell in line, united by a code that transcended territory disputes and old grudges. You did not harm children. You did not use innocence as weapons. Nikolai Petrov had violated the most fundamental law of their world. He would pay with blood. By midnight, Alexander had assembled over 200 soldiers. They gathered at a warehouse on the edge of the city, a sea of grim faces and loaded weapons. The air crackled with tension, with anticipation, with the promise of violence to come. Alexander stood before them, a general addressing his army. "Many of you will not survive tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I won't lie to you about that. Petrov's compound is a fortress. His men are well trained and well armed. Some of us will fall." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But that little girl has no one else. Her mother was murdered. Her father failed to protect her. She is 6 years old, locked in a cage, waiting for monsters to decide her fate." His hands clenched at his sides. "I am going to bring her home, and I am going to kill every man who stands between me and my daughter. If you ride with me tonight, you ride knowing that we may not come back." Daniel stepped forward, standing beside his boss. This is a suicide mission. Anyone who wants to walk away can do so now. No judgment, no consequences. No one moved. Alexander looked at Daniel, something passing between them that words couldn't capture. 15 years of loyalty, 15 years of brotherhood. It had all led to this moment. "Boss," Daniel said quietly, so only Alexander could hear. "What if we don't make it?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "I don't need to survive, Daniel. I only need Emma to live. Whatever happens to me doesn't matter. Just get her out." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then let's go get your daughter." The convoy rolled out at 2 a.m., 30 vehicles cutting through the darkness, headlights off, engines rumbling like distant thunder. They moved in formation through empty highways and forgotten back roads, a river of steel and vengeance flowing toward its destination. Alexander sat in the lead vehicle, loading his weapons with mechanical precision. His pistol, his backup, extra magazines tucked into every pocket. In his chest pocket, pressed against his heart, was Emma's drawing, their family beneath the yellow sun. The Rockford compound appeared on the horizon, its lights glowing against the night sky like a beacon calling them forward. Alexander's army had arrived. The first explosion split the night like a thunderclap from hell. Alexander's forces hit the compound from 3 directions simultaneously. The eastern wall crumbled under the impact of rocket-propelled grenades. The northern gate buckled beneath the weight of an armored vehicle. The western perimeter erupted in a storm of gunfire that lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks. Nikolai's men responded with desperate ferocity. Bullets screamed through the air from fortified positions. Spotlights swept across the killing field, illuminating attackers who fell beneath withering fire. The old meatpacking plant had been transformed into a death trap. Every window, a sniper's nest. Every doorway a choke point. Bodies dropped on both sides. Alexander moved through the chaos like a ghost of vengeance. He didn't take cover. He didn't hesitate. He walked through the gunfire as if the bullets themselves feared to touch him, his weapons blazing, his eyes fixed on a single destination, the main building, where Nikolai waited, where Emma was caged. Daniel fought beside him, clearing enemies with brutal efficiency. Behind them, Tony Caruso's men provided covering fire, while the Benedetti brothers pushed through the eastern breach. "Boss, stay down!" Daniel shouted, as bullets chewed the ground at Alexander's feet. Alexander didn't slow. A guard emerged from a doorway ahead. Alexander put 2 rounds in his chest before the man could raise his weapon. Another appeared at a window. Alexander's 3rd shot found his skull. The entrance loomed before them, reinforced steel doors, already dented from the initial assault. Alexander nodded to Daniel, who produced a shaped charge from his vest. The explosion tore the doors from their hinges. Inside, the building was a labyrinth of corridors and abandoned machinery. Rust and blood mingled on the concrete floors. Emergency lights cast everything in a hellish red glow. Alexander's team swept through methodically, room by room, eliminating resistance with cold precision. The deeper they went, the fiercer the fighting became. Nikolai's personal guard had been held in reserve, fresh soldiers against Alexander's exhausted army. Men fell around him. Allies he had known for years, cut down in an instant. Alexander pressed forward, leaving Daniel to coordinate the rear guard. He had to find Emma. The top floor of the main building was quieter. Too quiet. Alexander's instincts screamed a warning as he climbed the final staircase, his weapon raised, his senses heightened. The door at the top opened into a vast office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the battlefield below. Expensive furniture lay scattered across marble floors. And in the center of the room, standing with a pistol at his side, was Nikolai Petrov, Moretti. Nikolai's voice carried no fear. "I was wondering when you would arrive." Alexander leveled his weapon. "Where is my daughter?" "Safe. For now." Nikolai smiled that serpent smile. "Did you really think you could storm my fortress and rescue her like some fairy tale hero? You're a criminal, Alexander. A murderer. Just like me. I'm nothing like you. No?" Nikolai circled slowly, keeping his distance. "We both kill. We both destroy anyone who threatens our empires. The only difference is that I'm honest about what I am." His smile widened. Victoria understood. In the end, when she begged me to spare her life, she understood exactly what kind of man you are. She died with your name on her lips. Did you know that? Calling out for a monster who would never come. The words ignited something volcanic inside Alexander. He fired. Nikolai dove, impossibly fast, returning fire as he rolled. A bullet grazed Alexander's shoulder, but he barely felt it. He advanced, firing again and again, each shot driving Nikolai backward. They collided in the center of the room. Weapons fell away. Fists and fury replaced bullets. They fought like animals, crashing through furniture, slamming into walls. Nikolai was younger, stronger, but Alexander had something Nikolai would never understand: a father's desperation. Alexander caught Nikolai's arm and twisted. Bone snapped. Nikolai screamed. Alexander's hands found his throat, squeezing with all the strength he had left. "This is for Victoria," Alexander growled. "And for every moment of fear you put my daughter through." He squeezed until Nikolai's eyes went dark, until the body beneath him went limp, until the monster who had destroyed his family breathed his last rattling breath. Alexander released him, stumbling backward. Blood poured from his shoulder, his side, a dozen wounds he couldn't remember receiving. The room spun around him. And then he heard it, from somewhere below, muffled but unmistakable. Emma's voice, screaming for her daddy. Alexander forced himself to move. Every step sent agony ripping through his body. Blood soaked his shirt, dripping onto the floor, leaving a crimson trail behind him. His vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in like a predator waiting to strike. But Emma's voice cut through the haze. Her screams pulled him forward when his body begged him to stop. He stumbled down the staircase, gripping the railing to keep himself upright. The building groaned around him. Somewhere in the chaos of the battle, a fire had started. Smoke curled through the corridors, thick and choking. Flames licked at the walls, spreading hungrily through the old structure. The compound was dying, and Alexander was running out of time. He followed Emma's cries through a maze of hallways, past bodies of fallen soldiers from both sides. The heat intensified with every step. The smoke burned his lungs. His legs threatened to buckle beneath him. A door, heavy steel, locked from the outside. Alexander shot the lock. Once, twice. The third bullet shattered the mechanism. He kicked the door open and nearly collapsed through the threshold. The room beyond was a storage area, filled with crates and abandoned machinery. And there, in the far corner, illuminated by the hellish glow of approaching flames, was the cage. Emma. She was curled into a ball, just like she had been in the trunk of that car weeks ago. Her eyes were squeezed shut. Her hands covered her ears. Her small body trembled with terror. "Emma." Alexander's voice cracked on her name. Her eyes flew open. For a moment, she didn't move. She stared at him like he was an apparition, a dream conjured by desperate hope. Her lips trembled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Daddy, I'm here, sweetheart." He dragged himself toward the cage, leaving bloody handprints on every surface he touched. "Daddy's here." The cage was secured with a heavy padlock. Alexander raised his weapon, but his hands shook so badly that he couldn't aim. He dropped the gun, grabbed the lock with both hands, and pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled again, putting every ounce of remaining strength into his arms. The metal cut into his palms. Blood made his grip slippery. The edges of his vision went black. The lock snapped. The cage door swung open. Emma launched herself into his arms with a force that nearly knocked him over. Her small body collided with his, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face burying itself in his shoulder. "I knew you'd come, Daddy," she sobbed. "I knew you'd come. I knew it. I knew it." Alexander held her tight, tears mixing with blood on his face. "I promised, sweetheart. Daddy always keeps his promises." The building shuddered. A section of ceiling collapsed somewhere nearby, sending a shower of sparks cascading through the air. "We have to go." Alexander tried to stand, but his legs refused to cooperate. The blood loss was too severe. The wounds were too deep. He fell to his knees, Emma still clutched against his chest. "Daddy?" Emma's voice pitched higher with fear. "Daddy, get up. Please get up. I'm trying, sweetheart." The words came out slurred. The darkness was closing in faster now. "Daddy's just a little tired." Footsteps thundered through the corridor. Alexander's hand fumbled for his fallen weapon, but he couldn't find the strength to lift it. Daniel burst through the doorway, his face blackened with smoke and blood. He took in the scene in an instant and rushed forward. "Boss!" He grabbed Alexander's arm, hauling him upright. "We have to move. The whole building is coming down." Alexander leaned heavily on his lieutenant, one arm wrapped around Daniel's shoulders, the other still holding Emma against his hip. They moved through the inferno together. Flames roared around them. Support beams cracked and splintered. The heat was suffocating, relentless. The exit appeared through the smoke like a portal to salvation. Daniel kicked it open, and they stumbled out into the cold night air. Behind them, Nikolai's compound collapsed in on itself. The roof caved inward with a thunderous crash. Flames shot into the sky, painting the clouds orange and red. Alexander made it 3 steps before his legs gave out completely. He fell to the grass, Emma tumbling with him, She scrambled up immediately, her small hands pressing against his chest, his face, desperately trying to keep him awake. "Daddy! Daddy, open your eyes, please." Alexander looked up at her. His daughter, his miracle, safe in his arms at last. "I love you," he whispered. More than anything, the darkness took him. Emma's screams echoed across the burning compound as she clutched her father's motionless body, begging him not to leave her alone. 3 months later, the first thing Alexander saw when he opened his eyes was sunlight, not the harsh fluorescent glare of a hospital room, though he had spent weeks in one, not the cold gray light that filtered through Chicago's polluted skies. This was real sunlight, warm and golden, streaming through curtains that billowed gently in a mountain breeze. He was alive. The doctors had called it a miracle. 4 bullets, massive blood loss, a collapsed lung. By all medical logic, Alexander Moretti should have died on the grass outside Nikolai's burning compound, but he had made a promise to his daughter, and he intended to keep it. The recovery had been long and painful. Weeks of surgeries, months of physical therapy, endless nights where the pain threatened to overwhelm him. But every time he wanted to give up, Emma was there, sitting beside his bed, holding his hand, reading him stories in her small, determined voice. She had saved him, just as surely as he had saved her. When Alexander was finally strong enough to walk again, he made good on the promise he had whispered in that burning building. He gave it all up, the empire he had spent decades building, the territories worth billions, the army of soldiers who had followed him into hell. He handed it all to Daniel, his most trusted friend, his brother in everything but blood. "You've earned this," Alexander said, signing the final documents in Daniel's office. "Build something better than what I built, something that doesn't require monsters." Daniel clasped his hand, eyes glistening with emotions neither man would ever speak aloud. "I'll make you proud, boss." "I'm not your boss anymore," Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on his face. "I'm just Alex now, a father, nothing more." They left Chicago on a Tuesday morning. Alexander, Rachel, and Emma, 3 broken people who had somehow found each other in the darkness. They drove west, leaving the city skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror, heading toward a future none of them had dared to imagine. Montana welcomed them with open skies and endless horizons. Alexander had purchased a small ranch outside Bozeman, a modest property with a white farmhouse, a red barn, and acres of land where Emma could run and play without fear. No guards, no cameras, no weapons hidden in every room, just peace. The wedding was held on a September afternoon, beneath a canopy of autumn leaves. Rachel wore a simple white dress, wildflowers woven into her auburn hair. Alexander wore jeans and a button-down shirt, looking nothing like the man who had once commanded an empire. Emma served as flower girl, scattering petals down the aisle with a concentration that made both adults laugh. When the ceremony ended, she threw herself into their arms, declaring them officially a family. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Alexander and Rachel sat on the porch watching the stars. "Do you miss it?" Rachel asked quietly. "The power? The control?" Alexander considered the question. A year ago, his answer would have been yes. A year ago, he couldn't imagine existing without the empire that defined him. But now, looking at the life he had built from the ashes of the old one, he knew the truth. Not for a second. Some bonds are written in blood, and no force on earth can break them. A father and daughter, separated by secrets and years, had found each other against impossible odds. Their connection proved that family is not just about shared genetics, but shared love, sacrifice, and the willingness to fight for those who matter most. Redemption is not a destination, but a journey. Alexander Moretti had done terrible things. He had been a monster by any definition. But when given the chance to choose between his empire and his daughter, he chose love. And in that choice, he found the path back to his own humanity. Our past does not define our future. The darkness we have walked through does not determine where we can go. Every sunrise offers a new beginning, a fresh chance to become the person we were always meant to be. Alexander proved that even the coldest heart can learn to love again. True strength is not measured in power or wealth or the fear we inspire in others. True strength is measured in the sacrifices we make for our families, the love we show when it costs us everything, and the courage to change when change seems impossible. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means everything to us, and helps these stories reach more people who might find comfort, hope, or inspiration in them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our daily uploads. We bring you new stories every day, tales of love, redemption, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us all. We would love to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever experienced a moment where love transformed your life or the life of someone you know? Please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We read every single comment, and your stories inspire us to keep creating. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for joining us on this journey. Your presence here, your engagement, your willingness to open your hearts to these stories, that is what makes this community so special. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May every day bring you moments of joy, love, and connection with those who matter most. Goodbye for now, dear friends. We will see you in the next video.